All right, today we're diving into a therapeutic concept that has, well, a pretty fascinating split personality. It's called reparenting, and its story takes us from this really radical and honestly controversial frontier of psychotherapy all the way to a cornerstone of modern healing. So let's get into it. Now, at the very heart of this whole thing is a super personal and powerful question. Can you actually go back and heal the wounds from a tough childhood? Reparenting therapy, in all its different forms, says, yeah, you can, but how it proposes we do that has changed, dramatically over the years. So, what exactly are we talking about here? Basically, reparenting is a therapeutic process. It's designed to give you the emotional support that you might not have gotten when you were little. Things like security, affection, validation, to help you work through the issues you're facing as an adult. So, where did this pretty huge idea even come from? Well, for that, we have to go back to a theory that kind of reshaped psychotherapy in the middle of the 20th century. It was called transactional analysis. Okay, so this guy, Eric Berne, he came up with this idea that our personality is made of three parts. You've got the child, which holds all our feelings and memories from when we were kids. Then there's the adult, which is our logical here and now self. And finally, the parent, which is like a recording of all the attitudes and behaviors we learned from our own parents. The core idea of reparenting started here, that you could fix psychological problems by basically reforming a defective parent ego state. And this is where our story takes a sharp turn into the extreme. In the 1960s, a therapist named Jackie Lee Schiff took that idea of reforming the parent ego state and pushed it to its most literal and most radical conclusion. She called her method total regression, and it was this immersive, all-in kind of therapy she developed mostly for patients with schizophrenia, a condition that Schiff, pretty controversially, believed was caused by catastrophic parenting failures. And the process was, wow, incredibly intense. We're talking about adult patients living with their therapists for years, regressed all the way back to acting like an infant. And not just metaphorically, literally. We're talking about bottle feeding, being held on lap pillows, the whole thing. The therapist's goal was to become a total surrogate parent and completely replace the original faulty parent ego state. Now, you might be thinking this sounds wild in hindsight, but here's the thing. It was considered pretty fringe even back then. Schiff knew her work was provocative. She was aware that other therapists would be outraged, and she actually moved around to avoid scrutiny from her colleagues so she could keep doing it. And that kind of hints at the much deeper problems that were about to come to light. This brings us to what her model was called, the cathexis model. And for a lot of critics, it didn't just say a therapy. It started to morph into something they saw as far more dangerous. A key part of it was a technique called passivity confrontation. So Schiff had this theory that symptoms of schizophrenia were just a form of passivity. And to break that passivity, therapists used these really aggressive confrontational methods. But critics were quick to point out that this sounded like a fancy term for negative reinforcement, involving both physical and emotional punishment. And the accusations got really, really serious. Critics started saying that the therapy had become an ideology. They were using some heavy words here, like thought reform, brainwashing, and totalitarianism. They argued it created this closed system where the therapist had all the power, and that could be easily misused. The list of ethical problems just kept growing. The entire model was built on blaming the birth parents, and patients were totally discouraged from having any contact with them. Schiff was also accused of misusing scientific research to justify her theories. And maybe most importantly, the complete lack of boundaries created this huge power imbalance and a really unhealthy dependency. Eventually, the International Transactional Analysis Association officially found her culpable of ethics violations. But the story doesn't just end there. It's not all grim. Because out of the collapse of Schiff's radical model, a new, safer, and much more ethical form of reparenting started to emerge. And this new version was all about healing, but within clear, safe, therapeutic boundaries. And just look at the difference here. The shift is just stark. So instead of living in an institution for years, clients are in standard therapy sessions. Instead of literal, physical regression, it's about a metaphorical connection to your inner child. The therapist is no longer a surrogate parent with total control. Instead, they're a security-providing attachment figure who operates within very clear ethical lines. And that gets us to the most crucial point. The goal is no longer some kind of hostile takeover of your personality. It's not about trying to erase your past. It's about identifying and finally meeting the core emotional needs that just went unmet when you were growing up. Today, the best example of this modern approach is something called limited reparenting, and it's a core piece of schema therapy. It was developed by Jeffrey Young, and it's a really highly regarded treatment for personality disorders and other chronic issues. So schema therapy basically says we all have these 5 core emotional needs. And when these needs aren't met in childhood, we can develop what they call maladaptive schemas. These are like deeply ingrained negative patterns of thinking and feeling. Limited reparenting works to heal these schemas by finally and safely addressing those core needs right here in the present. One of the key modern techniques is called imagery rescripting. It sounds complex, but it's actually a pretty amazing process. A client revisits a painful memory, but just in their mind's eye. And then the therapist metaphorically steps into that memory to stand up for the child, to provide comfort, and to validate their feelings. It's this really safe, powerful way to emotionally repair past experiences without any of the risks of literal regression. So, after this whole journey from the radical to the refined, where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with this really profound and empowering shift in who actually does the parenting. And this right here, this is the most important part. The modern approach, especially in what we now call self-reparenting, it empowers you. It's about using your own healthy adult self to give the care, the compassion, and the guidance that your inner child has always needed. And this is so critical because it builds your internal strength and self-reliance, not a dependency on a therapist. The therapist is a guide, sure, but you become the one doing your own healing. Ultimately, the whole idea of reparenting therapy evolved. It moved away from that radical idea of trying to erase or replace your history. Because, let's be real, you can't change what happened. But what you can do, and what modern reparenting helps you do, is build a brand new, healthier, and way more compassionate relationship with yourself. It's about learning to be the supportive parent to yourself that you always needed. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. If you took a moment to listen really closely, right now, what does that younger part of you, your inner child, really need to hear from you today?